Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessment, and in today's session we are going to look at the Strategic Environmental Assessments, which is also called as SEA. And with this we'll also see that how the scope of EIA, the environmental assessment, is now going on widening, and there's also like not only looking at project specific impact, but also looking at other concerns which we talked in our first week of the class. So we look at the SEA, Strategic Environmental Assessment. So here we see that EIA continues to widen with time. So we saw a lot of things like we looked at different even looked at the cumulative impact assessment. Then we looked at different kind of impacts, what are the environmental problems we are dealing with, and then you also must be thinking about a lot of aspects which we have not been able to integrate with the EIA process or within the domain of EIA. So how that we really take care of. So we see that with that understanding, we have started expanding and widening the scope of EIA, and that is what we look at in the strategic environmental assessment. So this strategic environmental assessment, we see that it is a very stretched form of EIA, which stretches vertically as well as horizontally. So it takes care of like not only the projects, but the policies, plans, and programs in a very broader way. So today we'll learn about this, and our coverage will include definitions and need of strategic environmental assessment. And then we'll look at what is happening worldwide and how effective it is, and then we'll walk through one of the example to understand how the report looks like, strategic environmental assessment report looks like. So the expected learning outcome is that once you finish the session, you can define SEA, strategic environmental assessment, and also discuss why it is needed, and then you can also discuss on the what's the practice of SEA worldwide and how effective is SEA, and then you would be able to explain with the help of the example. So looking at SEA, Strategic Environmental Assessments, was initiated in USA in 1970, and then it was initiated as an extension of EIA, which is project-based EIA. So in Europe, certain changes have taken places. So you see that not very strongly it comes up, but there have been changes to incorporate and accommodate SEA. China also, we see they have passed specific legislation in 2009 related with SEA. And we see that it is going on increasing, and across the countries it has been like it's finding its way to implementation. Even in India we see that there's a lot of debate and discussion on the implementation of SEA. So now moving on, we'll look at the definitions and need of strategic environmental assessment. So a definition-wise, SEA can be defined as a process that aims to integrate environmental and sustainability considerations. So it brings environment as well as sustainability consideration in a strategic decision making. So if you see that in EIA that also helps in decision making. It's also seen as a part of sustainability consideration, but it looks at individual project wise decision making. But here it helps in the strategic decision making. Well, at a larger scale, what kind of decisions have to be made, whether what should be allowed, how much should be allowed, and so on. This SEA can be said to be EIA for policies, plans, and programs. It's just not looking at the project, but it's also looking at the policy at larger scale, at the higher scale. It's looking at the plans, what kind of plans you have to develop, what range of projects, and what are your programs to do what kind of activities. So SEA takes care of all these policies, plans, and programs. So for this SEA, the approach is different because you can see that it changes at the hierarchy level. It also changes when it comes in the project because you're making a complete plan, you're deciding on the implications of policies and programs. So the approach changes a lot because it deals with very large scale and it has a longer time frame, and then and since it has a longer time frame, it has greater uncertainties which are involved in the process and the timeline. And if we see SEA is specifically a process, so it's ongoing process where things keep on refining and we develop understanding. So this is a process and it is said to be taking place parallelly with the plan making process. So wherever you're developing drawing plans, it is taken parallelly to that particular process, and then it keeps on providing information, environmental information at all the relevant stages. So what kind of programs have to come, what kind of projects have to come, and then it keeps on feeding information for that. So looking at trying to understand the key difference between SEA and EIA, we see that SEA, by nature itself, it's a strategy, vision, and plan. So it's a strategy. It's just a framework. It's a kind of a guiding document. Whereas EIA is the construction and operational action. So it's very firm and solid things rather than strategies and vision and plan. And then when you look at the scale of impact, then for SEA, the scale of impact, it's very large scale, macro scale, where you have national, regional landscape, whereas if you look at EIA, it's at micro scale, which is like local and site specific. Likewise, you see the scope of impact, what kind of impact it might happen. It will be broad in scale and magnitude. The outcomes when you undertake this process, the impacts which you'll identify will be broader in scale and magnitude, whereas in EIA it will be very local and very specific, pinpointed areas you would see. And then considering the time scale in both the cases, in SEE and EIA, you see it has long to medium term, whereas EIA is medium to short term. And if you look at the data requirement for SEA and EIA, so you have mainly SEA would be descriptive but possibly quantifiable, and you would be using a lot of maps at the national or regional statistical or trend data. Whereas in EIA, it would be mainly quantifiable. So in SEA, it's mostly descriptive, but in EIA, mostly it will be quantifiable and it would be mappable as well. And it would involve a lot of field work, sample analysis. You might be collecting a lot of data, local monitoring and data. So in SEA, you would be looking at larger regional statistics and trend data, whereas in that you might be looking at a lot of local pattern, what's happening, and very specific information. And likewise, looking at it in terms of alternatives, what will happen in SEA is like you would be looking at the fiscal measures, what economic alternatives you would look at, social or physical strategies, technologies, spatial balance of location, where to put, you would have larger choices. Whereas in EIA, you would have very specific alternatives in terms of locations, technology, design, and timing, because you'll be only deciding it for the project, and more or less you must have designed the project. So in case of SEA, assessment-wise, it is more aligned to sustainability, environmental criteria, and objectives, whereas in EIA, it would be legal restrictions and it will follow the best practice. And if you look at the rigor or uncertainty with SEE, so you will see that it's less rigorous, more uncertainty is there. And EIA is very rigorous and there is less uncertainty, so you can say things with more certainty. And the outputs wise, SEA is more broader in all its approach, because it deals with strategy, vision, and plan, whereas in EIA, it is much more detailed. So that's how we see the major difference between SEA and EIA. And now looking at why do we really need SEA. So if we see that EIA, we have been looking at all the components of EIA. So EIA, if you see, is reaction. So like you have seen that we have already worked out the project description and we are starting everything after that. So EIA is said to be reaction to the development proposal. So you have already prepared the proposal, and now you're looking at what impact it will have, what is happening, and how we can reduce that. So it is said to be reaction rather than anticipating them and then beforehand taking care of it. And then because you're doing it project-wise, there are likely chances that you might not be covering things which are also equally damaging, but they do not come in the domain of EIA. So you saw in Indian context how we deal with the list, checklist, and then how in different domain we deal with things. In different contexts, how do we deal with things? So there are a lot of things which do not come in the domain of EIA, which in the first week, which we had seen, like the environmental status, drivers of climate change, all those really let a lot of things pass by which might have significant environmental impact. So project EIA gives you project by project information, but it is SEA that gives you a comprehensive idea about what kind of total requirement is there and what's the carrying capacity of that area, and then you can deal with it. So that's the limitation of EIA, so that SEA can take care of it. So you would also see that we discussed that EIA also does not allow much of alternatives to be considered. It might have 3 maximum alternatives which you might consider. But when you're dealing with SEA, that time you can have a range of alternatives which can be considered at the initial phase of the project. And you will also see that time constraint wise, EIA is undertaken in a very quick manner, because you have constraints of how much money can be invested, as well as there is a time frame which you need to follow because of the resources and money and because of the requirement. And then even public participation can be limited in EIA compared to what can be done in SEA. So SEA, if you see, allows consideration of all the alternatives, maximum alternatives. SEA allows also tiering of decisions, like you can have decisions at different level, with higher level decisions made for the policy, programs, and plans, and then that can allow EIAs to have a narrow scope. So in the diagram you can see you have policy SEA, you have plan SEA, you have plan SEA, and then you have program SEA, and then when you have projects within those programs, then EIA can take care of it. So at every level, because of SEA, also you are able to evaluate the environmental impact at different hierarchy, as well as you are able to mitigate those things at different level. So because of that complementing nature, it's also allowing a very narrow and specific operation of EIA. So now looking at SEA, how it has been adopted worldwide, we see that it's the usage Adaptation is increasing worldwide. You see that it's been adopted in USA, initiated and adopted in USA. Then European Union and China have well established SCA regulations. Then you also see Canada also requires it for their decision making. South Africa also has guidance on it. And then you also have Hong Kong and other places also you can see. And many countries are implementing it, going on adopting it at various levels. So now moving on and seeing how do we really deal with it at the, what do we really do at the scoping stage with SEA. So we have been seeing it for EIA, so we'll see what we do for scoping, what kind of questions we look at for SEA. So we look at what decisions need to be made now at the scoping stage and in future regarding the policies, plans and programs which have been proposed. What are the meaningful decisions that has to be taken, and then what are the appropriate geographical locations where things have to come up. Is it necessary to analyze particular effects of proposed action at the broader scale? Do you really need to do or not, and how long SEA will continue, the time frame of it, and are there any other stakeholders that may provide meaningful input? So what all stakeholders to be considered and how many, and identification of the key stakeholders. So that is about the key questions which you might look at the scoping stage of SEA. Now looking at the SEA process. So if you look at it, there are certain steps you can see here, and then how while you're doing the program planning and policy development, how it can help you. So you see that SEA process, the stage 1, setting the context and objective for what you're doing, and then you can have evidence gathering and engagement from the local plan preparation, whatever is being planned there, then you can transfer that here. Then stage B deals with developing and refining alternatives and assessing effects. So what all choices you have in terms of alternatives. And then stage C deals with preparing the sustainability appraisal report, and stage D deals with representation on sustainability appraisal report from public consultation, and then post-adaptation reporting and monitoring. So similarly, you can see how monitoring and reporting part is also taken care of in the SEA process. So you have here all that, what is really going to happen in your area, so how you keep on informing that and how that relates with SEA, how does it link at the very beginning stage here. So you can see that. So you see that post SEA project level is also needed, like the mitigation itself. So here we can see one example. There are a lot of examples which we have given you in the suggested read and watch. So I have taken one example to help you see how it looks like, what scale does it works on. So we have taken here Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program. So you see here that SEA is done for the program, not just for any particular projects. You have seen PPP. So here we are looking at the example which is done for program. So it's oil and gas leasing program. It's by Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM. We can call it Bureau here. And this Bureau is managing oil and gas program, and it is required to ensure proper balance among oil and gas production in the area and the complete region. And then it is also required to ensure environmental protection and also ensure impacts on the coastal zone. So Bureau prepared this programmatic environmental impact statement, PEIS, programmatic environmental impact statement. So you see, because it's connected with the program, to assess the environmental, social and economic impact associated with the program. So now they're not going to look for just one project, but they're going to look for the complete program, which will involve number of projects together. So here we can see how they are looking at what kind of assessment will be taken care of within the program. So you can see the program level, certain are planning level and projects, and the program stage program, then they would also have certain leasing. Then within project they would be undertaking exploration, they would be taking production, and they would be undertaking decommissioning of this. So for the planning, the geographical scope of this, now you see what you have seen in EIA, and now you see the geographical scope of this is the continental. And then the lease sale where they would be doing, that would be a planning area, and within that they would have their projects. So they would have specific area where the projects would come up, and then the focus and scope of that would be identification of the program areas and number and schedule of lease sales for the program, identification of potential impacts and mitigation measures, and then application and enforcement of mitigation measures through the project. So here you see that these all things will be like part of this program which will happen. And then you see how what they're going to look at is 5-year program nationwide, and within that they would be giving lease sale within the region specific, and they would be doing exploration, project specific, and development plan for the specific platform they would be doing. So all this will be analyzed for its environmental impact. So they identified certain major issues for consideration for preparing this program environmental impact statement. So you see like oil and gas activities, then they had ecological resource that could be affected by oil and gas activities. Then they have identified sociocultural and economic resources, human health, climate change, regulatory oversight, oil spill, prohibiting leasing, limiting leasing, including more planning areas, developing. So these all areas came through public commenting opportunities, so larger public participation. So through that they got these impact areas. And then they looked into the analytical issues where they had identify how they're going to, how much geographical area they're going to take, the geographical scope of their impact statement, then what kind of factors they would be considering here, and then what kind of resource on which they would be evaluating the effects. So all those were considered in the analytical issues, and then they had to consider the geographical scope. So they had 26 planning areas. So now you look at 26 planning areas, and 6 of these have been identified for leasing considerations. And so they have all the numbers here. So you look at the scale of it. So here when we see the planning area map here, so you can see all the yellow area which will be for their assessment purpose. And within this, their scope is to for the purpose of preparation of this impact statements, they would only base it on the current and available and reliable information, scientific information. And they would use this for like they would be looking at direct impact, indirect impact, as well as cumulative impact within this SEA. And then they would be looking at for the proposed action as well as for the alternatives what they have. So like we read that it has more alternatives, and this is also taken for all the stages. And then here we are seeing that it is also considering direct, indirect, and cumulative impact as well. So they identified potentially affected resources here. So from this example, you can see water quality, air quality, biological resources. For this also report, I have given you the link, so you can access this report as well and see. It's a 2,000 plus page document, so you should use huge documents. So we're just browsing some of the very selective pages to see what it looks like, how it's different from EIA. So you can look at how they have identified specific biological and ecological resources, which were analyzed in detail, and then they have looked into impact producing factors like accidental oil spills, offshore and onshore disposal of liquid waste, solid waste disposal, gaseous emissions, and so on. And then which were the issues which were not analyzed in this particular impact statements are also given here, like worker safety, seismic inventory, and so on. So you see that's how it doesn't becomes part of this. And then how the entire report is structured. So if you look at the structure of the reports, we had seen theoretically how it is structured. So you're seeing by the example, we see that chapter 1 provides the background information. So we have seen that in EIA also we provide project information. So even this provides similarly the background information. Then we see chapter 2 describes alternatives evaluated for this impact statement. So all the alternatives which are considered. Then chapter 3 provides an overview of marine and coastal ecoregions. So what are the different regions, and then what are the physical, natural, cultural, and economic resources or conditions which can be potentially affected by the proposed action. Then you also have chapter 4 here, which describes impact producing factors. So which are the factors which are producing impact with routine operations. So that has been undertaken here, and then it discusses the relationship of physical environment to oil and gas development, and then it provides exploration and development scenarios, as well as the accident of oil spill scenarios for whatever what different assumptions they have made in the impact statement. So in chapter 5, you see that they identify unavoidable adverse impacts associated with alternatives. And then in chapter 6, they discuss relationship between short-term use of environment and long-term productivity. Chapter 7 discuss significant, irreversible, irretrievable commitment of natural and man-made resources. So you see that's a lot of similarity in a logical structuring of SEA with EIA. And chapter 8, you see that they discuss the process used for preparing the program, and list of agencies, organizations which are there, and list the names, education, experiences of persons who helped prepare the impact statement in their chapter 9, and then all the attachment, all the details which are there have been provided. So you see how intensive the report is. So here you can see they are discussing the alternatives included in the proposed actions. You see they had 8 planning areas, and then they had 8 alternatives, and the 8th alternative, if you see, is the null situation where they do nothing. So here also the number of alternatives are large, like we said, compared to EIA and SEA. In SEA you have larger alternatives which are discussed here. So you see here in the figure, so we'll just skim through all the kind of analysis, not all, very selective analysis which they have done. So you can see the Gulf of Mexico planning area where the leasing will happen, and then you see the impact producing factors which they have identified, like noise, traffic, drilling, bottom land disturbance, air emissions, explosives, visible infrastructure, space use. So you have now already studied all those domain. So now they are culminating that here, and then they are also doing it at SCE level. And then you can see different development phase here during exploration, development, operation, and decommissioning. So for all that, they have prepared this matrix, which you can see here. So that is how very selective things I'm showing here. So here they are also undertaking the cost benefit analysis. This is the principle they have followed, like what is the anticipated production of the planning area, what's the revenue, and what's the cost which will be incurred, and then what will be the gross revenue because of that. So based on that, they have prepared here like all program area, and then what kind of cost will be there, environmental, social cost, and then what will be the net benefit. So they have a fair idea about how positive or negative the project is. So in the table here, you can see potential impacts of projects, proposed actions and alternatives. So because of the proposed program, what is going to happen, and based on all the alternatives, so they are talking about 8 alternatives. So here you can see alternative 1, how they are looking at the water because of the routine operation, expected accidental oil spill, unexpected catastrophic discharge events, and then program impact common to all planning areas. So, and then what kind of impact it might have to specific area, the areas which they have identified. So with that all, for alternative 1 for water, they have looking at alternative 1 air quality and so on, all the aspects, the factors they have identified. So they're going to look for all the alternatives for all the factors here. So you think about how intensive the report is. So I'm going to skip that. And then you look at here what kind of maps they are making. So you saw that it's more descriptive and then mappable. So you look at all the maps and tables they have prepared. So you can see estuarine and fluvial drainage areas of the northern Gulf of Mexico region. So you can see here how they have prepared. You can look at the legend as well. You can see all the ecoregions they have identified in this Gulf of Mexico. Then you can see the program area they have identified, depth zone they have studied here. Then you can see the hurricane and landfalling possibilities here. And then the frequency, what they are looking at. And then you can look at estimated wetland density of Gulf of Mexico region here. So what kind of wetland density are here that has been estimated. You can look at the annual rate of land area change in the coastal Louisiana, what's happening. So they're taking a very collective assessments of the entire area with respect to the program they're dealing with, where they're going to have number of projects within 5 years. So they are looking at the coastal vulnerability index of Gulf of Mexico. So see how big is the region, and then location of cold water coral system features. So look at the complexity which is there, and then chemosynthetic communities which are there. So here you can see the potential changes in marine and pelagic habitats of the northern Gulf of Mexico, or marine ecoregion that could result from the climate change as well. So they have also taken care of climate change aspects here. Then you can also see critical habitat from one of the area here, what they have identified and mapped, and then how the bowhead whales, their tracking has been done in the area. So you see through these examples, like through this particular example, the scale of how SEA deals with. So a Royal Town Planning Institute has also given advice and technical notes on how to undertake SEA. And then we see that China has relatively implemented, though it has adopted later, but it has implemented SEA through legislative framework, and then have created a lot of examples here. So they have also published regulations and also guidelines. China has done that, and based on that, it needs 3 types of plans are required in SEA in China. So you see category A plans where you have land use plans, then you have category B special plans for industries, and then category C guidance plan for category B plans, those which establish development strategies for special plans. So now looking at the SEA effectiveness, how really effective it is. So it said that SEA, its effectiveness, like EIA's effectiveness, can be considered in different ways. It is initially SEA had been very challenging, and then also not having legal support has also led to a lot of its, in terms of its effectiveness, has led to slow acceptance of that. But now there's been increasing emphasis on SEA, and just because it's very important to have a wider understanding of what's happening in an area and what kind of programs, policies, plans can bring those kind of changes here. So whenever the plans are made, and if they are robust plans, and then it has been identified, all aspects are assessed, then it leads to good development of robust plans, and then they are not really challenged. So they help you to attain sustainability, and it helps you to even make decisions, and it can also streamline EIA projects, EIA assessment as well. So politically also it helps you to assess which aspects are important or not important, and it also helps you to identify the societal issues very well, and you can look at the larger context, and it's also evidence based, and then it allows you to integrate not just the physical component, social component, but policy, program, and plan components all together, and it makes SEA very effective. So now we see that SEA has spread and evolved rapidly in past decade, and it is continued to increase, and it is seen as like more emphasis is now given on SEA, or the integrated approach with SEA and EIA. So you see now that how EIA, where we started from the entire environmental status, we saw the range of problems which were there, and EIA could solve a considerable amount of it, but then it could not handle some of the aspects. So how widening of it also allows you to take care of environmental issues in a comprehensive manner. So we see that is seen as a future of EIA in a very integrated manner. So that's all what we saw with the example of SEA and the conceptual understanding of SEA, and we are also looking at it as a future for the environmental impact assessment. So summarizing what we really studied today, we looked at the definitions and why do we really need SEA. We looked at what kind of trend is happening worldwide and what about its effectiveness, and then we looked at walked through one of the example of SEA, and we saw the huge documents and the kind of approach is taken and how it is different from EIA. So that's all for today. These are the key references which are used for this particular session, and these are the suggested watch and reads, as our coverage is very limited, and there are a lot of examples which you can see and a lot of issues which you can understand pertaining to it. So that's it for the session. Winding up, please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about any concerns you have. Do share your opinions, experiences, and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring EIA. Thank you.